going to show you how to make the panels from my Moon Phases runner from Kreative Kiwi. For this I'm going to be using a 5x7 hoop, one layer of cutaway stabiliser per hooping, and there will be 2 hoopings to each panel, a selection of threads. I've got matching bobbins as well because the threads are going to overlap slightly, and as they're high contrast I don't want them showing through. Some squizzers, pins with heads on them, and my fabrics and batting cut to size. You'll find a link to this design in the video description below, and I will also include links to my other videos on how to add sashing and binding to turn it either into a table runner or a wall hanging. You're going to start off by hooping your layer of stabiliser, so place it over the outer hoop, place your inside hoop over the top and insert it. Then we're going to pin around the top edge of the hoop to stop our stabiliser from being pulled down between the 2 hoop pieces. So take a pin, rest it on the inside top of the hoop, push it through your stabiliser, bring it back round and through again, and that will anchor it. And you're going to do that on all 4 sides. The larger your hoop, the more pins you will use, of course. Load your file called ends into your machine along with your neutral thread, and then you're going to stitch round number 1, and that's going to give you your placement outline for your batting. Place your batting over the outline and tape it in place. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 2 to secure it. Trim away the excess batting from around the edge of the 2 outlines. Place your fabric over the 2 outlines and tape it in place. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 3 to secure it. Load your thread colour for the quilting into your machine, and I'm going with gold for this, and then stitch round number 4. Load your thread colour for the triple moons into your machine. I'm going with gold, and then stitch round number 5. We're now going to remove this from the hoop, and we're going to cut it into 2, straight down the middle. I'm just going to trim up around the edge of each. And we've now some trimming to do. Now along here you've got a straight edge each side before you come to the curve, and we're going to cut down to the point where the curve starts. And it's important that we preserve this bit of fabric here. So I'm going to do the same on the other side. Okay, so there's the back, and I'm now going to trim around close to the stitch line around the curve. Take care, of course, not to cut your stitches. So that's the first piece, and now I'm going to do exactly the same with the second part. we've now got our two pieces that we're going to join on to the centre in our next hooping, and we can set these aside for the minute. So we now come to the second hooping. I'm doing version 1 of this design, which means that the moon is represented in two colours, a dark and a light colour. Version 2 is just the light colour. So up to you to choose which version you want to do, but whichever version you do, stick with it throughout. I've loaded file G into my machine of version 1. You're going to hoop and pin your stabilizer as you did for the first hooping. Load your neutral thread colour into your machine, and then you're going to stitch round number 1, and that's going to give you a placement outline for your batting. We're now going to place our batting, so place it over the outline and tape it in place. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 2 to secure it. Trim away the excess batting from around the edge of the stitch line, taking care of course not to cut your stitches. Place your centre fabric over the outline and tape it in place. Pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 3. Load your thread colour for the quilting into your machine. I'm staying with blue, and then stitch round number 4. If you're doing a full moon or a new moon, then you will only have one colour to stitch, whereas for the rest you have 2. Load your thread colour for the darkest side of the moon into your machine. I've loaded a matching bobbin as well, purely because if I used a white one, it's high contrast in comparison to my top thread and it might show through. Once you've done that, you're then going to stitch round number 5, and that's going to stitch the darkest side of your moon. Load your thread colour for the light side of the moon into your machine. I'm using gold, and then stitch round number 6. Next we're going to cut from the edge of the fabric down to each point, here, 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 here and here, because once again we want to preserve the edges. And then we're going to trim out the fabric from around the arc. Okay, so we're now going to place our first segment at the top here. So I'm going to turn my hoop around just so I can see what I'm doing, and we're going to align this stitch line here and here in line with this stitch line here and here, and you want to make sure that this stitch line here sits on top of this stitch line here. So I'm going to fold this in half so that I can find the center of my segment, and I'm going to just let it fall in place. Now this is a little bit faffy, as I call it, but it's not difficult. So I'm just going to pop a pin in here just to keep my fabric, my segment under control. and then I'm going to make sure that this stitch line sits on top of this one and the edges match, and then I'm going to pop a pin to hold it in place. Now make sure that you keep your pins right out of the way of the stitch line. The stitch line is going to be around here, and then I'm going to do exactly the same the other side. And I'm going to add a little bit of tape just on the edge, and that's just going to keep the foot from catching underneath. Then we're going to pop our hoop into our machine and stitch round number 7, and that's going to zigzag along this join and join the two segments together. And we're now going to do exactly the same on this side. So I'm just going to fold my segment in half just to find the middle. Lay it on the centre line there so that this stitch line here sits on top of this stitch line here, and just let it fall apart, and then oops, and then I'm going to pin it in place. I can't see what I'm doing. I'm very sorry if I look as if I'm faffing about. And again, keep your pins right out of the way of your stitch line. And now I'm going to put a little bit of tape just each side. And then you're going to pop your hoop into your machine and stitch round number 8 to secure it. So just remove your hoop after each one of these to check your joins, and if you're happy with them, then you're now going to stitch round number 9, and that's going to do the satin stitching over the 2 arcs. If you're not happy with your joins at any point, you can unpick the zigzag stitching and go back to that round, so that'd be 8 and 7, and redo them. Load your thread colour for the satin stitching into your machine, and then you're going to stitch round number 9. So that's our panel complete, and we can now free this from the hoop. And you can tidy up the edges. I'm just going to trim the excess stabiliser along here. And of course you can do a far better job than I can under this camera. Okay, so what do you do next? You're going to stitch all your panels, and then I've stitched another one here so that you can see what we're going to do. Then you're going to add, or should I stitch on your sewing machine, the 2 panels together. Now, if when you go to line them up you find that your quilting doesn't line up, turn it round and it will line up perfectly. So you're going to place them face down and then line up the quilting points, the tips of the gold band there, and your corners. I just want to show you quickly, I've put pins in at every single area where they need to match up, and on the ends, where the pin goes through, I've done a dot in pen, and then I'm going to put my clips in. Now if you're using pins, you'll pin over here. If you're using clips, you're going to clip on this side, and I'm going to be using clips. There's loads of ways of aligning things. This is my preferred method. Let me know in the comments how you like to do yours. And then I'm going to remove all my pins. And now I'm going to draw a straight line all the way to the end, and I want the edge just this side of my stitch line. I can't see what I'm doing here, so and now I'm going to sew straight down that line on my sewing machine. I'm not going to bore you by forcing you to watch me do that, but you want to make sure that you stitch this side of that line. That way it's going to hide the two stitch lines on the panels. So there, I've stitched it, and let's open it up again now. And as you can see, everything meets up lovely. I'm now going to add these to my other panels, and then once they're all stitched, I will trim up the top and bottom, and then you can either add sashing or you can just bind it straight away onto the edge. It's entirely up to you. And I will leave links to my videos for sashing and binding in the video description below so that you can have a look at them. Okay, I've sewn all my panels together. Once you've stitched them all and you've squared up the edges, you want to press your seams apart, and that's going to reduce the bulk, so that once you put your backing fabric on, it all lays nice and flat. And I'm just going to do a run through now of the panels for you, and my table isn't big enough, so I'll warn you now. Here we go. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this stitch along. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to be notified of new videos as soon as they're published. Do pop along to Kreative Kiwi's Facebook group. There's lots of ideas, help and inspiration there for everybody. And thank you very much for joining me. You'll find a link to this design in the video description below, and the links on how to sash and bind a runner or a wall hanging.